All the medical students were whispered nervously about their upcoming exams. But on August 9, 2024, at R.G. Kar Medical College in Kolkata, India, something sinister lurked beneath the surface of this routine. Dr. D, a bright and ambitious 31-year-old junior resident, was well known within these walls. She had a reputation for being compassionate and diligent, often staying late to ensure her patients were comfortable. She had dreams of becoming a great doctor, of making a difference. But those dreams came to a tragic end that day. It began with an eerie, high-pitched scream that shattered the usual din of the hospital. The scream wasn't like the others they were used to. The cries of pain, the sobs of grief, or even the angry outbursts. No, this was different. It sent a chill down the spines of those who heard it. An instinctual feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The scream came from the third-floor lecture hall, a place where doctors would usually give lessons or where students would take notes diligently. But this time, the only lesson being taught was one of horror. Inside, lying on the cold, hard floor, was Dr. D's lifeless body. She was partially naked, covered in bruises, with blood seeping from her eyes, mouth, and private parts. Her legs were bent grotesquely, twisted at angles that seemed impossible for a living person. The sight was horrific, something straight out of a nightmare. When the news reached Dr. D's parents, their world collapsed. Their only child, their beloved daughter, had been found in such a state. They were told she wasn't feeling well. That was the excuse given to them, a vague, heartless explanation that only deepened their confusion and fear. They pressed for more information, their voices frantic and desperate over the phone, but all they got were cold, clinical responses. She wasn't feeling well, they repeated. "I'm not a doctor," one administrator said when asked for details. The vagueness, the lack of clarity, it all seemed too strange. But then, the call came that shattered their hearts completely. "Your daughter has taken her own life." The words were like a dagger to their souls. How could this be? Dr. D was not suicidal. She was driven, focused, and full of life. Nothing made sense. The scene of her death made even less sense. How could anyone believe she had done this to herself? Her injuries were too severe, her body too battered. As her parents made their way to the hospital, panic set in. They were desperate for answers. Why would the hospital suggest their daughter had taken her own life? What were they hiding? When they arrived, they were met with stone-faced administrators who seemed more concerned with protocol than with providing any real answers. The sight of their daughter's body confirmed their worst fears. There was no way Dr. D had done this to herself. The sheer brutality of her injuries, her broken pelvis, her fractured bones, the deep cuts and bruises, told a story of violence, not self-harm. The police began their investigation, but even that seemed tainted from the start. The officers seemed reluctant, almost afraid to dig too deeply. They focused on one suspect, Sanjay Roy, a civic volunteer at the hospital. CCTV footage had captured him entering the building around the time of Dr. D's death. He was seen wearing a Bluetooth headset that later went missing. That missing headset was found at the crime scene, and when the police tested it, it connected instantly to Sanjay's phone. But the story didn't add up. Sanjay was known around the hospital. He was a rough character with a violent past. He had been married 4 times, each marriage ending after allegations of abuse. He was also a trained boxer, a detail that seemed to cast an even darker shadow over his involvement. The evidence against him seemed compelling, but was it too neat? Too simple? Rumors began to swirl. This was not a case of one man's drunken rage. This was something far more sinister, far more calculated. There were whispers about the hospital's darker underbelly. Some spoke of a ring of corruption involving drug trafficking, organ sales, and even sex trafficking. Dr. D had stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see. She had become a liability, and someone, or perhaps several someones, had decided to silence her. The hospital staff were nervous. Whispers filled the halls, and everywhere you looked, there were furtive glances and hushed conversations. "Did you hear what happened to Dr. D?" they would say. "Did you know she was looking into things she shouldn't have?" It seemed everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Then there were the allegations from other doctors. They claimed Dr. D had been harassed for months leading up to her death. They said she had been threatened by hospital administrators, warned to keep quiet or face the consequences. They spoke of a climate of fear, where speaking out meant risking everything: your career, your safety, even your life. Despite the fear, a few brave souls began to speak out. Protests erupted, first within the hospital grounds, then spreading to the streets of Kolkata, and even reaching as far as New York City's Times Square. Doctors, nurses, and citizens demanded justice for Dr. D. They demanded safer working conditions, not just for themselves, but for all medical professionals. The hospital tried to quell the outrage with empty promises and vague statements. They spoke of new security measures and an internal review, but no one believed them. The truth was, no one felt safe anymore. Not in that hospital, not in any hospital. Dr. D's parents continued to demand answers. They refused to cremate their daughter's body, despite the hospital's suggestion, suspecting a cover-up. They wanted a thorough investigation. They wanted justice for their daughter, whose only crime had been doing her job and caring for her patients. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, but it seemed half-hearted. The police arrested Sanjay, but they didn't seem interested in looking beyond him. Yet, there were signs that more people were involved. There were reports of high-profile individuals fleeing the country immediately after Dr. D's death. There were whispers of political connections, of powerful people pulling strings to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. It wasn't long before people started asking questions about the principal of the medical college. He had been involved in several controversies before, accused of corruption, of covering up scandals, and now he was at the center of this storm. When asked about Dr. D's death, his response was chillingly dismissive. Why did she go to the seminar hall? Didn't she know better? It was as if he was blaming her for what had happened, as if her death was her own fault. Then came the final straw. A mob of nearly 2,000 people stormed the hospital. They ransacked the emergency department, destroyed equipment, and vandalized the very lecture hall where Dr. D had been found. It was chaos. The police were overwhelmed, some even accused of standing by, letting the destruction unfold. The violence seemed almost orchestrated, as if someone wanted to destroy evidence, to silence any remaining witnesses. And just like that, the chance for justice seemed to slip away. The case, which had started with such promise, now felt like another tragic story in a country where justice is often elusive. Dr. D's death, it seemed, would become another statistic, another unsolved mystery. But the fight isn't over. Dr. D's parents continue to push for answers, supported by a growing chorus of voices demanding justice. The world is watching, and so is the medical community. They refuse to let Dr. D's death be in vain. They refuse to let her be forgotten, because this is not just a story about one woman's tragic end. It is a story about the fight for justice, for truth, and for a safer future for all. And that fight is far from over. As we remember Dr. D, let's keep asking the hard questions. Let's keep demanding the truth. And let's keep fighting for a world where no one has to fear for their life just because they dared to speak out, to dream, or to care.